Hello guys, today we're going to be doing a video on Battlefield 2042's new patch 4.0, using the RTX 3060 Ti. We are running a Ryzen 3700X with 32 GB of RAM running at 3200 MHz. Alright, let's jump into the settings. We're going to be playing the game at 1080p low. The UI has actually been changed. This looks way better now. You can actually tell what you have selected. DLSS is off and dynamic resolution scale off as well. NVIDIA reflex off, ray tracing off, and yeah, okay, let's get into it. So this new patch apparently has given us somewhat better performance and more destruction as well, I've heard. Loading in is kind of laggy. Wow, the FPS is actually way better. Wait. And it was for a bit. Okay, yeah, I'm getting 100 FPS. It's still very... The keybinds have changed. It's still very finicky, but already I can tell a massive FPS improvement. So when this game came out, this system could get 70 to 80 FPS. It didn't really matter what preset because we're not GP bound, we're CPU bottlenecked. And right now we're sitting in the 70s to 80s, but we're actually boosting up into the low 100s as well, which is kind of crazy. Now looking at the CPU, we can actually tell that CPU core 3 is fully maxed out. 1, 2, 3, and 4, and then 6 is being used up, and 8 is also being used up. So that's probably 6, I would say. So the game's doing up 6 cores, and the main 4 cores, the first 4 cores are being used up quite a bit. They're sitting in the high 80s into the low 50s. It's got a weird range to it. The game's overall feel feels great right now. And this is a 128 player playlist, which is known to be CPU heavy. And it never ran like this ever. With the 3700X, we were sitting in the 70s, falling to the 60s and 50s as well. We're pretty much spawning in the middle of the action here at the C1 flag. This area would be more demanding than, let's say, the outskirts. So in the middle of the map, we're getting 90 to 100 FPS, sometimes falling into the 70s and 80s like it was before. The game obviously still does have problems. It's not like magically fixed, but this is definitely a step in the right direction with the game's performance. Yeah, so let's go ahead and push up to medium settings. These are our settings right here. Let's see how... This shouldn't impact the performance too much. There'll probably be 1 or 2 settings that are CPU bound, but we should honestly still be running pretty great. Now the FPS has definitely fallen a little bit. Not really, actually. It's still... It just depends on the situation. The game does have some stuttering issues still, though. I will say that. Now the mouse movement doesn't... Oh, can I... okay, let's go down here. Okay. I've yet to see the FPS fall below 60. The game feels very smooth so far. But... what could happen is normally... when you play for an hour or two, the game's performance will degrade and you will slowly start to lose performance and fall into the 60s and then 50s and then becomes unplayable and you gotta restart the game again. So Kaleidoscope was one of the main maps that I actually had an issue running. It normally ran at 50 FPS to 70 FPS with this current setup, and it was pretty unplayable. The mouse movement felt very laggy. You pretty much had to snipe and sit back. You couldn't run around and make fast-paced plays. But right now, even though it's raining and storming, we're sitting in the 80 to 90 FPS range, which is kind of crazy. And we're playing on high settings also. We're playing at 1080p high still. So now we're playing on Manifest. This is the map that I played on during the video, on the original video. And I pretty much explored around this spawn area, and I went up this mountain, I believe, this little hill, up to the station, and I went onto the ship. And FPS ranged between the mid 70s to the mid 80s. And we never actually spiked up to the 90s or 100s, so we can easily fall into the high 70s and the mid 80s still, just like the original video. But it seems like our top end is actually increased, and we can actually go up into the 90s now without any issue. Let's go ahead and exit the car and go up this mountain like before. 100 FPS, wow. Our average FPS is definitely increased. Looking back on the video, oh, game froze. Looking back on the videos, we were getting an average FPS of 81 to 83. Now we're sitting in the 90s. So an average FPS is obviously increased up into 87. Now we'll try to hang around the same area, same sort of area as the original video. And I'll go ahead and put up an FPS counter of what we got during the video. Just to give an understanding, basic understanding on how the game's gonna run. It's not gonna be a perfect comparison since there's different amount of players on this map and each player is doing a different thing compared to the original video. But it will give us just a basic understanding on the two different patches. Alright, performance doesn't seem to be too much better compared to what we had before. Sitting in the low 90s, the high 80s to low 100s. FPS seems pretty poor on this system compared to the 3700X. Maybe it's a case by case basis. There's a bunch of variables, I guess.
Success! One down.
It's kind of disappointing. I was expecting us to be playing at 120 to 130 FPS at this point, but it seems like that's not the case. But at least on the mid-range system, there was definitely a big improvement with the mouse and the overall FPS. It was actually very playable. I think I'll wrap the video here, guys. I hope you enjoyed it. I hope you found it useful. If you did, give it a like and a subscription. Really highly appreciate it. See you next time.